Chapter 6 is Detour Through the Desert. And if you remember, we ended the last chapter after this encounter with pride that was really very humbling for Much Afraid. After meeting Pride, Much Afraid and her companions went on their way, but she was obliged to hobble painfully and could go but slowly. However, she accepted the assurance and assistance of her two guides with far greater willingness than before, and gradually the effects of the encounter wore off and she was able to make better progress. Then one day, the path turned a corner, and to her amazement and consternation, she saw a great plain spread out beneath them. As far as the eye could see, there seemed to be nothing but desert, an endless expanse of sand dunes with not a tree in sight. The only objects breaking the monotony of the desert were strange, towering pyramids rising above the sand dunes, hoary with age and grimly desolate. To the horror of Much Afraid, her two guides prepared to take the steep path downward. She stopped dead and said to them, "We mustn't go down there. The shepherd has called me to the high places. We must find some path that goes up, but certainly not down there." They made signs to her that she was to follow them down the steep pathway to the desert below. Much Afraid looked to left and right, but though it seemed incredible, there was no way possible by which they could continue to climb upward. The hill they were on ended abruptly at this precipice, and the rocky cliffs towered above them in every direction, straight as walls, with no possible foothold. I can't go down there," panted Much Afraid, sick with shock and fear. He can never mean that, never. He called me up to the high places, and this is an absolute contradiction of all that he promised." She then lifted up her voice and called desperately, "Shepherd, come to me. Oh, I need you. Come and help me." In a moment, he was there, standing beside her. "Shepherd," she said despairingly, "I can't understand this. The guides you gave me say that we must go down there into that desert, turning right away from the high places altogether. You don't mean that, do you? You can't contradict yourself. Tell them we're not to go there. Show us another way. Make a way for us, shepherd, as you promised." He looked at her and answered very gently, "That is the path, Much Afraid, and you are to go down there." "Oh, no," she cried. "You can't mean it. You said if I would trust you, you would bring me to the high places, and that path leads right away from them. It contradicts all that you promised." "No," said the shepherd. "It is not contradiction, only postponement for the best to become possible." Much Afraid felt as though he had stabbed her to the heart. "You mean," she said incredulously, "you really mean that I'm to follow that path down and down into that wilderness and over that desert away from the mountains indefinitely? Why," and there was a sob of anguish in her voice, "it may be months, even years before that path leads back to the mountains again. Oh, shepherd, do you mean it's indefinite postponement?" He bowed his head silently, and Much Afraid sank to her knees at his feet, almost overwhelmed. He was leading her away from her heart's desire altogether, and gave no promise at all as to when he would bring her back. As she looked out over that endless desert. The only path she could see led farther and farther away from the high places and all that she was longing to see. Then he answered very quietly, "Much afraid? Do you love me enough to accept the postponement and the apparent contradiction of the promise, and to go down there with me into the desert?" She was still crouching at his feet, sobbing as if her heart would break. But now she looked up through her tears, caught his hand in hers, and said, trembling, "I do love you. You know that I love you. Oh, forgive me because I can't help my tears. I will go down with you into the wilderness, right away from the promise, if you really wish it. Even if you cannot tell me why it has to be, I will go with you. For you know I do love you, and you have the right to choose for me anything that you please." It was very early morning, and high above them, hanging in the sky over the silent expanse of desert, was a young crescent moon and the shining morning star like a brilliant jewel close beside it. There, Much Afraid built her first altar on the mountains, a little pile of broken rocks, and then with the shepherd standing close beside her, she laid down on the altar her trembling, rebelling will. A little spurt of flame came from somewhere, and in an instant nothing but a heap of ashes was lying on the altar. That is to say, she thought at first there were only ashes, but the shepherd told her to look closer, and there among the ashes she saw a little stone of some kind, a dark-colored, common-looking pebble. "Pick it up and take it with you," said the shepherd gently, "as a memorial of this altar which you built and all that it stands for." Much Afraid took the stone out of the ashes, scarcely looking at it and feeling that to her life's end she would never need a reminder of that altar. For how could she ever forget it, or the anguish of that first surrender? But she dropped the pebble into a little purse or bag which the shepherd gave her and put it away carefully. Then they began the descent into the desert. And at the first step, Much Afraid felt a thrill of the sweetest joy and comfort surge through her, for she found that the shepherd himself was going down with them. She would not have sorrow and suffering as her only companions, but he was there too. As she started down the path, he began a song which Much Afraid had not heard before. And it sounded so sweet and comforting that her pain began to melt away. It was as though the song suggested to her a part, at least, of the reason for this strange postponement of all her hopes. This is the song he sang. "A garden closed art thou, my love, where none thy fruits can taste. A spring shut up, a fountain sealed, an orchard run to waste. Awake, north wind, and come, thou south, blow on my garden fair, that all the spices may flow out as perfume on the air." Canticle 4, verses 12 through 16. They reached the desert surprisingly quickly because although the path was very steep indeed, Much Afraid was leaning on the shepherd and didn't feel her weakness at all. By the evening of that same day, they were down on the pale sand dunes and walking toward some huts built in the shadow of one of the great pyramids, where they were to rest that night. At sunset, when the sky burned fiery red over the western rim of the desert, the shepherd led Much Afraid away from the huts to the foot of the pyramid. Much afraid, he said, all of my servants on the way to the high places have had to make this detour through the desert. It is called the furnace of Egypt and a horror of great darkness. Genesis 15, verses 12 and 17. Here they have learned many things which otherwise they would have known nothing about. Abraham was the first of my servants to come this way, and this pyramid was hoary with age when he first looked upon it. Then came Joseph with tears and anguish of heart, and he looked upon it too and learned the lesson of the furnace of fire. Since that time, an endless succession of my people have come this way. They came to learn the secret of royalty. And now you are here, much afraid. You too are in the line of succession. It is a great privilege, and if you will, you also may learn the lesson of the furnace and of the great darkness just as surely as did those before you. Those who come down to the furnace go on their way afterward as royal men and women, princes and princesses of the royal line. Much afraid looked up at the towering pyramid, now shadowy and black against the sunset sky, and desolate as it looked in the waste of desert, yet it seemed to her to be one of the most majestic objects she had ever seen. And all of a sudden, the desert was full of people, an endless procession of them. There was Abraham himself and Sarah, his wife, those first lonely exiles in a strange land. There was Joseph, the betrayed and wounded brother who had been sold into slavery, who, when he wept for his father's tent, saw only the alien pyramid. Then one after another she saw a great host which no man could number, stretching across the desert in an endless line. The last one in the line held out a hand, which she took. And there she was in the great chain herself. Words came to her ears also, and she heard them quite plainly. Fear not, much afraid, to go down into Egypt, for I will there make of thee a great nation. I will go down with thee into Egypt, and I will also surely bring thee up again. Genesis 46:3. After this, they went back to the huts to rest that night. In the morning, the shepherd called Much Afraid again and led her away. But this time he opened a little door in the wall of the pyramid and took her inside. There was a passage which led to the center, and from there a spiral staircase went up to the floors above. But the shepherd opened another door leaning out of the central chamber on the ground floor, and they entered a very large room which looked like a granary. There were great piles of grain everywhere, except in the middle. And there on the open space, men were threshing the different kinds of grain in many different ways, and then grinding them to powder, some coarse and some finer. At one side were women sitting on the ground with hollow, smooth stones before them, grinding the very best of the wheat into the finest possible powder. Watching them for a while, Much Afraid saw how the grains were first beaten and bruised until they crumbled to pieces, but still the grinding and beating process continued until at last the powder was fine enough to be used for baking the best wheat bread. See, said the shepherd gently, how various are the methods used for grinding the different varieties of grain according to their special use and purpose. Then he quoted, "Dill is not threshed with a threshing instrument, neither is a cartwheel turned about upon the cummin. But dill is beaten with a staff, and the cumin with a rod. Bread corn is bruised, but no one crushes it forever. Neither is it broken with the wheel of a cart, nor bruised with horsemen driving over it. Isaiah 28, verses 27 and 28. As Much Afraid watched the women pounding the bread corn with their heavy stones, she noticed how long the process took before the fine white powder was finished and ready for use. Then she heard the shepherd saying, I bring my people into Egypt, that they too may be threshed and ground into the finest powder, and may become bread corn for the use of others. But remember, though bread corn is bruised, no one threshes it forever, only until the bruised and broken grain is ready for its highest use. This also cometh forth from the Lord of hosts, which is wonderful in counsel and excellent in working. And that's verse 29 of Isaiah 28. After this, the shepherd took her back to the central chamber, and they ascended the spiral staircase, twisting up and up into the darkness above. There, on the next floor, they came to another and smaller room, in the center of which stood a great wheel, flat like a table. Beside it stood a potter who wrought a work on the wheel. As he spun the wheel, he fashioned his clay into many beautiful shapes and objects. The material was cut and kneaded and shaped as he saw fit. But always the clay lay still upon the wheel, submitting to his every touch, perfectly, unresisting. As they watched, the shepherd said, In Egypt, too, I fashion my fairest and finest vessels, and bring forth instruments for my work according as I see fit. Jeremiah 18. Then he smiled and added, Cannot I do this with you, Much Afraid, as with the potter? Behold, as the clay is in the hand of the potter, so are you in my hand. Jeremiah 18, verse 6. Last of all, he took her up the stairway to the highest floor. There they found a room with a furnace in which gold was being smelted and refined of all its dross. Also in the furnace were rough pieces of stone and rock containing crystals. These were put in the great heat of the oven and left for a time. On being taken out, behold, they were glorious jewels, flashing as though they had received the fire into their very hearts. As Much Afraid stood beside the shepherd, looking shrinkingly into the fire, he said the loveliest thing of all. O thou afflicted, tossed with tempest and not comforted, behold, I will lay thy stones with fair colors, and lay thy foundation with sapphires. And I will make thy windows of agates, and thy gates of carbuncles, and all thy borders of pleasant stones. Isaiah 54, verse 11. And then he added, My rarest and choicest jewels and my finest gold are those who have been refined in the furnace of Egypt. And he sang one verse of a little song. I'll turn my hands upon thy heart and purge away thy dross. I will refine thee in my fire, remake thee at my cross. They stayed in the huts in the desert for several days, and Much Afraid learned many things which she had never heard before. One thing, however, made a special impression upon her. In all that great desert, there was not a single green thing growing, neither tree nor flower nor plant, save here and there a patch of straggly gray cacti. On the last morning, she was walking near the tents and huts of the desert dwellers when in a lonely corner behind a wall she came upon a little golden yellow flower growing all alone. An old pipe was connected with a water tank. In the pipe was one tiny hole through which came an occasional drop of water. Where the drops fell one by one, there grew the little golden flower, though where the seed had come from, Much Afraid could not imagine, for there were no birds anywhere and no other growing things. She stopped over the lonely, lovely little golden face, lifted up so hopefully and so bravely to that feeble drip, and cried out softly, "What is your name, little flower? For I never saw one like you before." The tiny plant answered at once in a tone as golden as itself, "Behold me! My name is Acceptance with Joy." Much Afraid thought of the things which she had seen in the pyramid, the threshing floor and the whirring wheel and the fiery furnace. Somehow the answer of the little golden flower, which grew all alone in the waste of the desert, stole into her heart and echoed there faintly but sweetly, filling her with comfort. She said to herself, "He has brought me here when I did not want to come for his own purpose. I, too, will look up into his face and say, 'Behold me. I am thy little handmaiden, Acceptance with Joy.'" Then she stooped down and picked up a pebble which was lying in the sand beside the flower, and put it in the purse with the first altar stone. End of chapter 6. What strikes you here, ladies?
That we don't understand his plans and what he wants to do in us. And it's in the hard places, in the hard times, that he's able to do in and through us what he needs to do, so that we can come to that place of really seeing his purpose and plan.
Yeah. Have any of you had the experience of being sure that you were on the right path and you knew what it was that the Lord had for you to do, and you were moving ahead with that, and then you met with a complete change of course? Often those things come suddenly. Yes? Is that a common enough experience that you can resonate with what just happened to Much Afraid? She was sure. I mean, he had given her a promise that he's taking her to the high places. And instead, he's turned her aside altogether to go to a place that she cannot possibly know, a place that seems diametrically opposed to her destination. And she responds with fear and tears and trembling and disbelief. This cannot be right. This cannot be your plan. This goes against what you spoke to me. And I know you can't lie, but you told me we were doing this, and now you're doing that. And he's so very tender with her, isn't he? He doesn't chide her. There's no rebuke. But he says, yeah, this is where we're going. I'll go with you, which is a great blessing, of course, because he's there to directly instruct. But that's just a heartbreaking moment. And some of us have come upon it very, very dramatically, where everything alters quickly and it seems that it can't possibly be what God meant when the path was started. I want to look at some scriptures. She incorporated several. Some of them are taken out of context, and so I feel like we need to look at the context to be sure we're understanding what they mean in their setting as well as the way in which Hannah Hurnard is using them. So the first is Genesis 15, verses 12 and 17. If someone would be willing to read that, I'd be glad to have you do it. Genesis 15, verses 12 and 17.
When the sun was going down, Abram fell into a deep sleep, and fear and terror came over him.
And then 17.
When the sun had set and it was dark, a smoking fire pot and a flaming torch suddenly appeared and passed between the pieces of the animal.
So the setting of this is that this is the cementing of the covenant between God and Abraham. Do you remember there's that kind of odd picture of Abraham cutting up animals and putting half of an animal on one side of a path and half on the other. And this actually, for a sober covenant, was a common practice in the ancient world. And it was this: those who were making the covenant would cut up an animal or multiple animals, put them on both sides of the path, and then the two of them would walk down the path between those torn animals. And the intention was that those who were making the covenant would understand if they did not keep the covenant, this was so significant that they would be torn apart as those animals had been. And by walking down that bloodied path, they were promising that they were going to adhere to the covenant. And so Abraham had killed the animals and laid them out. And then it says that he fell into a deep sleep. And so Hannah Hurnard used that. This was Genesis 15:12 on page 85. When the shepherd is saying to Much Afraid, all of my servants on the way to the high places have come through the desert. And he was calling the desert the furnace of Egypt and a horror of great darkness. And so that statement was equating that desert place to the deep sleep and the changes that God was making in Abraham in that time, because it was a terrifyingly deep darkness that Abraham experienced. So this is not a direct, she's not quoting that saying, hey, this is about Abraham and the covenant. She's saying that the experience that Abraham was so dark and terrifying on its face, and yet out of that God brought exactly what he was intending. If you go to Genesis 46:3, if somebody would be willing to read that. Yeah, so go ahead, Genesis 46:3.
I am God, the God of your father, the voice said. Do not be afraid to go down to Egypt, for there I will make your family into a great nation.
So he's saying this to Much Afraid, and this is on page 87. So he said, fear not, Much Afraid, to go down into Egypt. I'll make of you a great nation. I'll go with you to Egypt. So he was quoting this verse, which is one that God spoke to Jacob. Remember, after Joseph had risen to power in Egypt, there was a great famine in Israel, and his brothers went over to Egypt to get food, and they discovered, to their kind of horror, that it was their brother who was going to be the one distributing food. Remember that? And Jacob said, y'all can go home. There was some trickery there. Y'all can go home, but you have to bring your father back. And they said, we can't, he'll never do that. Anyway, so after all the machinations that occurred there, this is the time when God is saying to Jacob, you go to Egypt, This is what I want you to do. And there, I'm going to make of you a great nation, and I'm going to bless you there. And do you remember what happened to them in Egypt when Jacob and his family went?
They were blessed.
They were blessed. They were blessed initially. They were given a great place to live, and their flocks were growing, and they were growing in numbers. But after a few generations, Genesis tells us that there arose a leader who didn't know Joseph. And so the connection to Joseph meant nothing to him, and he's got all these people and he enslaved them. So remember, for about 440 years they lived in Egypt, a number of those as slaves. So this is sort of the lead in to the whole Exodus story. So when he's saying to her, you go down to Egypt, I'm going to make of you a great nation, much afraid isn't married. She doesn't have any children, right? But he's talking, in the shepherd in this case is talking in a spiritual sense, but he's hearkening back to that scene with Jacob and the Lord. Okay, 88, page 88, this is in my book. He uses an illustration from Isaiah 28. And he's going to use the verses of 27, 28, and 29. So can we have a reader for... Yeah, Isaiah 28, verses 27, 28, and 29.
They never use a heavy club to beat out dill seeds or cumin seeds. Instead, they use light sticks of the proper size. They do not ruin the wheat by threshing it endlessly. They know how to thresh it by driving a cart over it without bruising the grains. All this wisdom comes from the Lord Almighty. The plans God makes are wise, and they always succeed.
So Isaiah 28, actually verses 24 through 39, is an illustration that God gave to the prophet to pass on to the people. And Isaiah, in the early chapters of Isaiah in particular, he's prophesying destruction and devastation upon them because of their unfaithfulness. You have done this. God required this. You've chosen that. Here's what's going to happen to you. But he comes at certain places, and especially in the later chapters of Isaiah, to a place where he's telling them, but God is not going to chasten you forever. He's going to bring you back to himself, and it will be a beautiful thing. And he uses this illustration from the 28th chapter of a farmer. And he says, a farmer does a lot of different things with his fields, and he's directed by God to plant one thing here and another thing there, to do it. It doesn't say for the health of the soil, but that was a big part of it, and for the health of the plant. So things that want shade grow in one place, things that love sun grow in another, and God directs that for the farmer. And then he goes on to this threshing metaphor, and he says things are threshed differently. They're harvested and then they're brought to the threshing floor. And I don't know, do you know what a sheaf of wheat looks like? Do you know what the head of the wheat looks like? It has kind of almost prickly ends to it, and the actual kernels of wheat, yeah, that goes up and a little out to the sides. It's sort of this kind of shape, but down more toward the bottom of that shape is where the actual kernels of wheat are. And so all those things growing on the outside of the kernels are chaff. They don't have value for food, even really to feed to the animals. And so those are thrown away. And so wheat, barley would have been processed in much of the same way. They would be whacked. A flail was the instrument that they used for wheat, and the flail was like you know what an articulated truck looks like? It's like, okay, it's no help. The flail would be like a pole or it's a bat, say the size of a bat, and then part way up there would be a hinge, and there would be another piece on the end, but that piece could go out straight or it could go to the side, right? So the stick on the end would move in different directions, and so they would whack and whack and whack and whack the wheat with the flail, and then they would throw it up into the air, and the breeze would move the chaff away. When the weather was right, the chaff would be blown away, and the wheat would fall back down to the ground. But that was only the beginning of the processing. If wheat, and in here, she refers to the wheat as bread corn. It isn't really corn. There wasn't corn there like we know corn. But then the wheat had to be pounded and broken. And then the women took it and they put it in bowls and whacked it more with a stone until it was broken down to a fine powder. But the shepherd is saying here, just as Isaiah says to his people, this corn, this wheat, it isn't pounded forever. It's only pounded to the place where it becomes useful to God. And he says to make dill useful, we use one instrument, and to make cumin useful, we use another instrument. And for wheat, we have this whole lengthy process. It takes a lot of beating up. It takes a lot of pummeling, getting tossed around, getting way out of the comfort zone in order for these things to become useful to God. So that was the lesson of the threshing floor. And next, she went for the lesson of the potter. And this is a familiar story. The 18th chapter of Jeremiah is the one that tells it. I'm not going to have you read it. That's the 1st through the 10th verses in Jeremiah. But remember, there's the picture of the potter, and he's got his clay, and he forms the clay on the wheel, and it doesn't come out as he likes. And so he forms it into something else. And the clay gets kneaded, and the clay gets thrown around and whacked. And the potter is the one who determines the shape of the clay. The clay has no say in that. The clay lies mute before the potter, uncomplaining, unresisting. The clay had a purpose for being created. And that purpose was to be made beautiful by the hands of the potter. It might not be the shape that the clay thought it would become, but it's exactly what the potter has designated. So that was lesson 2. And then lesson 3, take a look, somebody, at Isaiah 54, verse 11. Isaiah 54, so this is another part of prophecy by Isaiah about coming destruction, but also about God's forbearance and his grace to his people. Go ahead, Kath.
The Lord says, O Jerusalem, you suffering, helpless city, with no one to confront you, I will rebuild your foundations with precious stones.
Okay. So I love the King James for this because that's closer to what Hannah Hurnard used, which is, tempest-tossed. Tempest-tossed, thrown around by the storms. Oh, you. who can do nothing to save yourselves. Prior to this, prior to verse 11 in Isaiah, God is saying, sing, O barren woman, you've never had a child. Burst into song, shout for joy, you who were never in labor, because more are the children of the desolate woman than of her who has a husband. Enlarge the place of your tent, stretch your tent curtains wide, don't hold back. He's painting this gorgeous picture of what is to come. Those of you who have been mournful, those of you who have longed for life, man, he's going to bring it. He's going to bring it in such a big way. Enlarge your tent. That means not just you get a bigger house, but it means that your tent has room for more people. God is going to give you more territory and more space. And then he says, don't be afraid. You will not suffer shame. Do not fear disgrace. You will not be humiliated. Do you remember that last chapter when pride met up with much afraid? This was a big part of his message. The shepherd is going to have you put to shame. You're going to be the laughing stock of everybody back home. He's going to bring shame on you, shame on you, shame on you. That was a repeated message from him. On Isaiah, the prophet is saying to the people, God is not going to let you be put to shame. And then it gets over to verse 11. O afflicted city, you tempest-tossed and not comforted, I will build you with stones of turquoise, foundations of sapphire. But in here, the King James Version is really, I will make thy windows of agates and thy gates of carbuncles and all thy borders of pleasant stones. She's saying in here sapphires and agates and carbuncles. Well, I couldn't think what agates looked like. They actually call them rainbow stones because they are, they're quartz. They're quartz crystal, but when they're polished up, they can have many colors. Some only one or two. Some, I can remember my mother having a pair of earrings that were agate, and they looked like a sun rising. It was sunrise colors. There was a black spot that looked like a sun rising. So the agates also have a form that's called a firestone. So refining in the fire brings this inner sense of fire and beauty to these stones. So again, the King James says agate and carbuncle. The carbuncle can be equated with ruby or with amethyst. So all of this we know means I'm going to give you a place so beautiful that your doors and windows are made of jewels, and it's going to be set all around with jewels. So don't lose heart, my people. And then we have come to the time in the furnace. So he takes her up to the place where gold is being refined. And remember, it says also there were some stones in there that were being refined by the fire. So why does he show her all these things? What are the lessons for her? In the potter, the furnace, the threshing floor.
He will help her change to the person he wants her to be, and he does it in a loving way, but as long as she follows him. The clay, he is the potter, she is the clay. You get refined like gold in the furnace. All three of those, the grain, he has to get the stubbornness out of us. He has to get that bullheadedness out of us. And he takes the bad from us. It's the separating. He's changing us. He's showing us who we can be as we travel with him.
Okay, Cindy?
And none of it is an easy process.
And none of it is an easy process. Karen, you had something. That, okay. Kath,
He tells us we're a new creation in Christ.
yeah,
Old
Yeah.
things have passed away. But that process of walking out that new creation is him refining all the things in us through life's journey, you know, the different things that we walk through. And so he's helping us to truly view things as they are, not as we want to look at our circumstances and say, oh my gosh, how could you do this?
this is horrible.
But instead of looking at the circumstances, look to him, and he's going to show us what he's doing in and through us. It's a submission, it's a letting go, it's a dying to self, all the things that is a part of the journey.
Yeah.
But as long as we're looking here, we can't look here.
If we can't acknowledge his sovereignty, we're not going to submit to him. Cindy, you had something? No. Okay.
He's always also telling us whether it's in the valley or in the high places, he is always with us, good or bad.
Yeah.
He is always protecting us. He's always there. All we have to do is call
Yeah.
out to him.
He was teaching her hard lessons, but in this case, he was showing her the lessons, wasn't he? She wasn't being pummeled like the bread corn. She wasn't in the refiner's fire at that moment. What do you think about the image of the desert filled with a long procession of people, and then the last one in line taking Much Afraid's hand? Yeah. Yeah, all followers, all the saints who preceded us.
I think the last one represents like who you come across, each one of us come across. We keep continuing that line.
Well, God, it's the Holy Spirit
The
who
Holy
continues.
Spirit
Yeah,
is passing on that line,
yeah,
and he's using us to help him to gather his flock.
Do
a
you
little bit.
do you remember in the book of Revelation, I believe it's chapter 5, there's an image of a great throng of believers, and the picture is of them coming up over the crest of the hill and walking down toward the throne. The number too great for John to count. And these are those same believers that Much Afraid is seeing strung out across the desert. Those over the ages who have kept the faith, those who have held to the truth, those called by God. Cindy.
It reminds me of the hymnal, because I believe I've mentioned this before, but if you go through the hymnal and you start reading the little pieces of information at the bottom, some of these hymns were written in the 500s.
Yeah.
Some were written last week. But that whole beautiful, musical rejoicing has gone from generation to generation to generation, and each one takes it and they sing their own way, but they sing to God, and we're singing together. And I just think, I love the Bible, but I love the hymnal as well. Just because you can feel your grandparents' hands on your shoulders, and their grandparents' hands on their shoulders. That it's all part of the same good, and all part of the same expression of joy and love.
Interestingly, Much Afraid does not come from a family of legacy, right? She comes from a family of fear and a family that hates the shepherd. So she is starting new legacy for her family. To me, however, there are two moments in here that are so critical. And the first is when she's kneeling at the feet of the shepherd and she says, "Yes, I love you, and I will go with you." Remember, and it says that she laid down her will in that place on the little altar that she had built, and then picked up a little stone. And where was the other little stone that she picked up in this?
Flower.
By the flower. And what was the name of the flower? Acceptance with joy. Yeah. So, in the first place, she was submitting herself to him with tears. She laid down her will with tears at that place. And then she met the flower, and she made another little altar, and she said, "Here I am, Lord." Acceptance with joy. I'm not going to do this tearfully. I'm not doing it with you dragging me to the altar. I'm not. This is not the same hard-won fight. I've just realized a new thing, that there is such beauty in being to accept what you have for me without kicking against it, without protest, and not just submitting dumbly and quietly, but doing it joyfully, fervently, proudly, to be yours. One more thing for you. I have a challenge for you this week, and I hope it's one that you will take. I spent some time, it took me quite a time this week, pondering who might be the guides that Christ has chosen to go with me in my life. And I thought of a lot of different things. Is it grief? Is it, is it sickness? Is it, what are the names of the guides that he chose for me? And I thought, I can't say that in those particular things I have necessarily learned what Christ would have me know. So I think if you search for the places that have taught you, not necessarily the hard places, that's kind of where my mind went first, but if you search for the places that have taught you, or the things that have taught you, and it may be in sorrow and suffering, in grief, in pain, it may be in those places. And I would say that at some times in our lives, we probably have different guides than at others. But I bet there have been some that have been lifelong companions for you. And so I encourage you to take the time to look for those and see maybe those places where you have built altars, where you've knelt before the Lord and relinquished things that were hard, and places where he has formed you so that you are not the woman now that you were 20 years ago. You are not. I hope you are not. I hope you are not. I hope that growth process continues to this very day. So thank you for staying longer. I tried to leave extra time, and even at that, it took more. But love ya. Come back next week. We'll have